The sharp, guttural growl ripped through the quiet of the house like a jagged tear in fabric. It was the kind of sound that stopped time, a sound that made your heart leap to your throat, a primal warning that something was terribly wrong. Buddy, a towering, 90-pound German shepherd with a coat as black as midnight, stood rigid in the darkened hallway, his teeth bared and his ears pinned back. His amber eyes locked on the back door, where a faint, almost imperceptible creak had broken the stillness. Emma Carter froze mid-step in the kitchen, her hand gripping a steaming mug of tea. She had never heard Buddy growl like that before, not in the 3 years since she had adopted him. A chill colder than the January air outside ran through her as her eyes darted toward the door. She couldn't see anything unusual, but Buddy's body language told her everything she needed to know. There was danger. It had been a long, exhausting week for the Carter family. Emma, a single mother juggling 2 jobs and raising her kids, 12-year-old Lucas and 7-year-old Abby, had been looking forward to this quiet Saturday night. The snowstorm outside had turned their suburban Kansas home into a picture-perfect winter postcard. The fireplace crackled in the living room, casting a warm, flickering glow, and the kids were bundled under blankets, laughing at a classic cartoon on the TV. For the first time in what felt like forever, the house felt peaceful. Safe. But now, standing in the kitchen with Buddy bristling at her side, Emma's instincts screamed otherwise. Buddy had been more than just a pet to the Carters. He was their protector, their glue. Emma had adopted him shortly after her messy divorce, during a time when she felt like her family was falling apart. Buddy had been a rescue, his previous life shrouded in mystery, but his intelligence and loyalty were undeniable. From the moment she brought him home, Buddy had taken to the kids immediately, his playful energy softening Lucas's adolescent mood swings and easing Abby's shy, anxious nature. At night, he would patrol the house, his footsteps a comforting rhythm in the quiet. Emma often joked that Buddy was her 3rd child, albeit the most well-behaved one. But beneath his gentle demeanor was a sharp, protective instinct that made him more than just a companion. He was a guardian, always alert to the slightest hint of a threat. And tonight, that instinct was on high alert. "Buddy?" Emma whispered, her voice trembling. "What is it?" The German shepherd didn't respond, his focus unwavering. He stepped forward, a low, rumbling growl building in his chest. It was then that Emma noticed it, a shadow moving outside the glass door leading to the backyard. Her blood ran cold. The storm had obscured most of the view, but there was no mistaking it. Someone was out there. Her mind raced. Was it just a neighbor? A prank? Or something worse? She reached for her phone, her hands shaking, but Buddy suddenly lunged forward, barking ferociously. The sound was deafening in the confined space of the house, startling the kids in the living room. Lucas appeared in the doorway, his face pale with confusion. "Mom? What's going on?" he asked, clutching a blanket around his shoulders. "Take your sister and go upstairs," Emma said firmly, her voice leaving no room for argument. "Now." "But, Lucas, do it," she snapped, her eyes not leaving the shadow by the door. Abby's small voice called from the living room, quivering with fear. "Mommy, why is Buddy barking like that?" "Go with your brother, sweetie," Emma said, trying to steady her voice. "It's okay. Buddy and I are just going to check something." The children reluctantly obeyed, disappearing up the stairs as Buddy's barks grew more ferocious. Emma grabbed the nearest thing she could find, a heavy cast-iron pan from the stove, and edged closer to the back door, her heart pounding in her chest. She flipped on the porch light, illuminating the snowy yard, and that's when she saw him. A man in a dark hoodie and gloves was crouched near the edge of the patio, his face obscured by shadows. He was fiddling with the lock on the back gate, clearly trying to get inside. Emma's stomach turned to ice. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was an intruder. "Hey!" she shouted, her voice cracking with adrenaline. "Get out of here. I'm calling the police." The man froze for a split second, then bolted toward the gate. But Buddy wasn't about to let him go so easily. Before Emma could react, the German shepherd sprang into action, leaping at the glass door with such force that it rattled in its frame. His snarls echoed like thunder, and for a moment, Emma saw the man hesitate, his steps faltering as he glanced back. He must have realized that if he stayed, he'd have to deal with Buddy. A confrontation he clearly didn't want. The man disappeared into the night, his footprints vanishing quickly in the falling snow. Emma locked the door with shaking hands, her breath coming in short gasps. Buddy continued to growl, pacing the kitchen like a sentry. It wasn't until several minutes later, when the adrenaline began to ebb, that she realized her hands were still gripping the frying pan like a lifeline. She sank to the floor, pulling Buddy close as tears streamed down her face. "Good boy," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Good, brave boy." Buddy licked her face, his fierce growl replaced by soft, reassuring whines. Upstairs, the kids huddled together, whispering nervously. But for the first time in a long while, Emma felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in years. Security. Whatever had just happened, one thing was clear. Buddy had protected them. He had been their shield against the unknown, their hero in the dark. But this was only the beginning of what would become a night they would never forget. The house was quiet again, but it wasn't the same peaceful stillness as before. It was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm, charged with tension, with the fear that it could all happen again. Emma sat at the kitchen table, her head in her hands, while Buddy remained near the door, his body still alert and his ears flicking at the slightest sound. Upstairs, Lucas and Abby were still awake despite Emma's assurances that everything was fine. She had tried to convince them and herself that the danger was gone, but the truth gnawed at her. The man had been trying to break into their home, and he might come back. Buddy had saved them tonight. There was no doubt about that. But Emma couldn't shake the what-ifs. What if the man had gotten inside? What if Buddy hadn't been there? What if, God forbid, the kids had been downstairs alone? Her hands trembled as she dialed 911. She explained the situation to the dispatcher, her voice shaky but determined. Within 20 minutes, 2 police officers arrived at the house, their flashing lights casting an eerie glow on the snow-covered street. Buddy greeted them at the door with a cautious stance, sniffing their boots and jackets as they stepped inside. Officer Ramirez, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, asked Emma to recount what had happened. She described the intruder's appearance as best as she could, his dark hoodie, his gloved hands, the way he had tried to open the back gate. Buddy sat beside her the entire time, his body pressed against her leg, as if he knew she needed the reassurance. "It's a good thing you have him," Ramirez said, nodding toward Buddy. "A dog like this can be a real deterrent. Whoever that guy was, I doubt he'll come back knowing he has to face this guy again." Emma forced a smile, but her mind was racing. Was it really over? Or was the intruder just waiting for another opportunity? She couldn't shake the image of the man in her backyard, the way he had lingered despite the light, despite her shouting. He had been so bold. It didn't feel like the kind of thing someone did on a whim. The officers took a look around the property, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. They pointed out the footprints in the snow, clear evidence of the man's path around the house. He had circled the home more than once, they noted, before attempting to break in. The thought made Emma's stomach churn. This wasn't random. He had been watching them. When the officers left, Emma double-checked every lock and window in the house. Then she checked again. She brought Lucas and Abby back downstairs and made them sleep in the living room with her, the 3 of them huddled together under a pile of blankets while Buddy lay stretched out in front of the door like a sentry. Lucas tried to put on a brave face, but Emma could see the fear in his eyes. "Do you think he'll come back?" he asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Emma stroked his hair, wishing she had an answer that could erase his fear. "I don't know," she admitted. "But Buddy won't let anything happen to us. He's here to protect us." Abby clung to Buddy's tail as if it were a lifeline, her small fingers buried in his thick fur. "Buddy's the bravest dog in the whole world," she said, her voice trembling but full of conviction. "He scared that bad man away." Emma smiled faintly. "Yes, he did, sweetheart. He's our hero." Despite her words, Emma barely slept that night. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside, sent her heart racing. Buddy remained vigilant, his ears constantly flicking, his body shifting slightly whenever there was a sound. He didn't rest, not truly. It was as if he knew the weight of the responsibility that had fallen on him. The next morning, the world outside looked deceptively normal. The snowstorm had passed, leaving the streets covered in a pristine, glistening blanket. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of quiet that usually brought comfort. But to Emma, it felt ominous. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still out there, watching. Her suspicions were confirmed when she stepped outside to let Buddy into the backyard. Near the gate where the intruder had tried to get in, she found something chilling. A cigarette butt, crushed into the snow. It hadn't been there the night before. Emma's breath caught in her throat. The man had come back. Buddy sniffed the ground, his nose working furiously as he followed the scent trail. His fur bristled, and he let out a sharp bark that made Emma jump. He was alert again, his posture rigid and his gaze scanning the yard as if he could sense the lingering presence of the intruder. Emma quickly called the police again, her hands trembling as she explained what she had found. This time, the officers took it more seriously. They promised to increase patrols in the neighborhood and suggested installing security cameras. Emma agreed, but she knew that wouldn't be enough to ease her fear. Cameras couldn't protect her children in the moment. Cameras couldn't act. Only Buddy could do that. For the rest of the day, Buddy stayed glued to Emma's side, refusing to relax. He seemed to sense her unease, mirroring her tension. When Lucas and Abby went outside to play in the snow, Buddy watched them like a hawk, pacing along the fence line as if daring the intruder to show his face again. Emma tried to distract herself by baking cookies with the kids, but the weight of the situation hung heavy in the air. Every time she glanced at the back door, her chest tightened. The kids, meanwhile, had turned Buddy into the star of their day. They fashioned a makeshift medal out of aluminum foil and a piece of ribbon, draping it around his neck with great ceremony. "You're a hero, Buddy," Abby declared, clapping her hands. Even Lucas, who had recently entered the too-cool-for-everything phase of adolescence, joined in, scratching Buddy behind the ears and murmuring, "Good boy." But as the day wore on, Emma couldn't ignore the reality of their situation. The man had come back once, and there was no guarantee he wouldn't come back again. She couldn't rely on the police alone. She couldn't afford to be caught off guard again. If it happened, she needed to be ready, and so did Buddy. She made a decision that evening, one that would change everything. If Buddy was going to protect them, she needed to give him the tools to do it. That same evening, after tucking Lucas and Abby into bed and checking every lock in the house for the third time, Emma sat down at the dining table with her laptop. Buddy lay at her feet, his chin resting on her slippers but his body still taut, his ears flicking at every small sound. She reached down to stroke his head absent-mindedly, her mind racing with what she was about to do. She opened her browser and began searching. Professional protection dog training near me. Emma had always known that Buddy was fiercely loyal, but after what had happened, she realized that his instincts alone might not be enough if the intruder returned. She needed him to be ready for anything, to not just protect, but to defend, decisively and effectively, if it ever came to that. After scrolling through countless websites, she found a local trainer who specialized in teaching dogs how to defend their families in real-life situations. The trainer, a retired K-9 officer named Steve Marshall, had glowing reviews from other dog owners who credited him with saving their lives. His motto, printed boldly at the top of his site, caught Emma's eye. "A loyal dog is love. A trained dog is safety." That sealed it for her. She called his number the next morning, her voice trembling slightly as she explained what had happened. Steve listened patiently, his tone calm and reassuring. "It sounds like Buddy already has the instincts," he said. "That's the hardest part to teach, and you're lucky he's got it naturally. What we'll do is hone that. We'll teach him to focus, to recognize threats, and to act decisively when it matters most. Trust me, Emma, you and your family are in good hands." Emma felt a surge of hope. This was the first step toward taking control of the situation. She scheduled Buddy's first session for the following afternoon. The next day, as Emma pulled into the gravel parking lot of Steve's training facility, she glanced in the rearview mirror at Buddy, who was sitting tall in the back seat, his ears perked and his gaze scanning the unfamiliar surroundings. The training center was a sprawling property on the outskirts of town, complete with a large fenced-in field, obstacle courses, and several outbuildings. Steve, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with a salt and pepper beard and a warm smile, greeted them at the gate. "This must be Buddy," he said, kneeling to Buddy's level and offering his hand. Buddy sniffed it cautiously before giving a single approving wag of his tail. "He's got good energy. Smart eyes, too. You can always tell when a dog's paying attention." Emma smiled nervously. "He's the best. He saved us the other night, but I don't ever want to put him in a position where he's unsure of what to do." "You're doing the right thing," Steve said. "Let's get started." The training was intense, more than Emma had anticipated. Over the next several weeks, Buddy learned to respond to specific commands with lightning-fast precision. Steve taught him to recognize threats not just by sight, but by subtle cues. Body language, sudden movements, even changes in tone of voice. Buddy practiced controlled aggression, learning when to hold back and when to act. He ran drills through simulated break-ins, learning to position himself between Emma and a threat, while staying calm and focused. Emma watched in awe as Buddy transformed before her eyes. He was still the same loving, playful dog at home, but now he carried himself with a new sense of purpose. His natural instincts had been sharpened to a razor's edge. Steve called him a textbook protector, and Emma couldn't have been prouder or more grateful. Lucas and Abby were fascinated by the training, often peppering Steve with questions when he came over for sessions at the house. Abby loved watching Buddy sprint through obstacle courses, and Lucas took it upon himself to practice commands with Buddy in the backyard. It became a family effort, and for the first time since the break-in, Emma felt a sense of empowerment returning to their lives. But the real test came sooner than anyone expected. It was a Friday night, 3 weeks after the initial break-in, and Emma was putting the kids to bed. Snow was falling again, the wind howling against the windows. The weather report had warned of an incoming blizzard, so Emma had stocked up on supplies and planned for a quiet weekend indoors. As she tucked Abby in and kissed her forehead, Buddy suddenly appeared in the doorway. His ears were standing tall, his gaze fixed on something outside the window. Emma froze. "Buddy?" she whispered. "What is it?" Buddy didn't move. His body was rigid, his tail lowered, and a low growl began to rumble from deep in his chest. Emma's heart started to race. She stepped quietly to the window and peered outside, straining to see through the swirling snow. At first, everything looked normal. Just the yard, the fence, the trees bending in the wind. But then she saw it. A figure moving near the back gate. Her blood turned to ice. It was him, the intruder. Emma's mind went into overdrive. She grabbed her phone and dialed 911, her voice calm but urgent as she explained the situation. The dispatcher assured her that officers were on their way, but Emma knew it could take time for them to arrive, especially in this weather. She couldn't just wait. Buddy was already at the back door, his growl intensifying as the figure moved closer. Emma grabbed the leash and clipped it to his collar, her hands trembling. "Buddy," she whispered, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "You know what to do." She opened the door just enough to let Buddy out, keeping a firm grip on the leash. The moment his paws hit the snow, Buddy's demeanor changed completely. He was no longer the family dog. They had unleashed the protector. The man froze as Buddy charged forward, barking with a ferocity that sent shockwaves through the icy night. He backed away quickly, his hands raised in panic, but Buddy didn't let up, his snarls warning the intruder that there would be no escape this time. Emma shouted from the doorway, her voice strong and commanding, "Get off my property! The police are on their way!" The man stumbled, slipping in the snow, and scrambled over the fence just as the sound of approaching sirens pierced the night air. Buddy stayed at the fence line, pacing and barking until the intruder was completely out of sight. Emma stood in the doorway, her heart pounding, tears streaming down her face, not from fear, but from relief. Buddy had done it. He had protected his family once again. Only this time, it wasn't just instinct. It was training. It was confidence. It was everything they had worked for. When the officers arrived moments later, Buddy greeted them with a wagging tail, his job done. Emma knelt beside him, burying her face in his thick fur, and whispered, "You're our hero, Buddy. You always have been." The officers moved quickly through the property, flashlights scanning the snow for any sign of the intruder. they found tracks leading away from the house, disappearing into the woods that bordered the neighborhood. The fresh snowfall made the trail easy to follow, but the man had a significant head start. After combing the area for an hour, the police returned to Emma's doorstep with an update. "We didn't catch him this time," Officer Ramirez admitted, his breath visible in the cold night air. "But we're confident he won't be back. Between the blizzard rolling in and your dog making it very clear he's not welcome here, I doubt he'll try anything again." Emma nodded, hugging herself against the cold. "Thank you," she said softly. I want my kids to feel safe again." The officer offered a reassuring smile. "Buddy's doing a better job protecting this house than most security systems ever could. We'll keep patrolling the area for the next few days. But you've got a real hero on your hands here." As the police left, Emma turned to look at Buddy, who was sitting stoically on the porch, his breath forming little clouds in the frigid air. His amber eyes met hers, calm and steady, and for the first time in weeks, Emma felt a flicker of peace. The following morning, the blizzard hit in full force, blanketing the neighborhood in several feet of snow. It was the kind of storm that shut everything down: schools, stores, even main roads. Emma didn't mind. The world outside was quiet, and for the first time since the ordeal began, she didn't feel trapped. She felt protected. The kids spent the morning playing with Buddy, who seemed to sense the shift in the household's mood. Abby giggled as he bounded through the snow, his large paws leaving perfect imprints in the pristine white blanket. Lucas fashioned a snowball and threw it as far as he could, watching with delight as Buddy tore off after it, his tail wagging furiously. The laughter echoed through the yard, warming Emma's heart. Afterward, as the kids sipped hot cocoa and warmed themselves by the fire, Emma found herself scrolling through her phone, looking at the reviews on Steve Marshall's website again. She couldn't stop thinking about how far Buddy had come in just a few weeks. He wasn't just their pet anymore, he was their protector, in every sense of the word. She glanced over at Buddy, who was lying by the fire, his eyes half closed, but his ears still twitching at every small sound. He had given her family something she hadn't felt in years: safety. And as she watched him, an idea began to form. A week later, with the snow finally starting to melt and life returning to normal, Emma called Steve again. This time, she wasn't calling for more training. She was calling to thank him and to ask for his help in giving back. "Steve, I've been thinking," she said, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Buddy isn't the only dog out there with the instincts to protect, and there are so many families who need what he's given us. I want to help train other dogs like you helped train Buddy. I want to make sure people feel safe in their homes." Steve was silent for a moment, and Emma worried she'd overstepped. But then his warm, familiar chuckle came through the line. "I think that's a great idea, Emma," he said. "There are a lot of dogs out there waiting for a purpose, and a lot of families waiting for a guardian. Let's make it happen." With Steve's guidance, Emma started a local program to connect families with rescue dogs and provide training for both the dogs and their new owners. She called it Buddy's Shield, in honor of the German Shepherd who had saved her family twice. The program focused on pairing dogs with families in need, especially single parents and those who had experienced break-ins or other threats to their safety. Buddy became the face of the program, his story inspiring countless others to adopt and train their own four-legged protectors. Steve helped Emma design training curriculums, and together they built a small but growing community of people dedicated to helping dogs find their purpose while giving families peace of mind. Lucas and Abby were thrilled to be part of it. Lucas helped with the dogs' socialization, teaching them to play gently with kids, while Abby proudly told anyone who would listen that her dog was the bravest dog in the whole world. Buddy took his new role with quiet confidence, guiding and calming the other dogs as they learned the ropes. One day, a young mother named Claire showed up at the training center with her 3-year-old daughter Mia and a shy Labrador mix named Daisy. Claire had tears in her eyes as she explained that she'd recently left an abusive relationship and was struggling to feel safe in her new apartment. "I heard about your program," Claire said, her voice trembling. "I thought maybe Daisy could help us. I don't want to be afraid anymore." Emma's heart broke as she listened, but she also felt a renewed sense of purpose. "You're in the right place," she said, reaching out to squeeze Claire's hand. "Daisy already has everything she needs to protect you. We're just going to help her see it and help you trust her." Over the next few weeks, Emma watched as Daisy transformed, much like Buddy had. By the end of the training, Daisy was confident, alert, and fiercely loyal. Claire's smile returned, and little Mia started laughing again, her giggles filling the training center as she played with Daisy. The day they graduated, Claire hugged Emma tightly. "Thank you," she whispered. "You've given us our lives back." Emma blinked back tears, looking down at Buddy, who sat at her side like a proud mentor. "Don't thank me," she said, scratching Buddy's ears. "Thank him. He's the real hero." Months later, on a quiet spring evening, Emma sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching Lucas and Abby play tag in the yard with Buddy. The air was warm, and the world felt alive again. She smiled as Buddy raced after Abby, his tail wagging, his bark echoing with joy. She thought back to that first terrifying night, when Buddy had stood between her family and danger. He hadn't just protected them, he had changed their lives. And now, because of him, dozens of other families were finding the same safety and peace. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Emma leaned down to pat Buddy's head. "You've done more than I could have ever imagined," she said softly. "You're not just our protector, you're our hope." Buddy wagged his tail and rested his head on her lap, his job done for the day. But Emma knew that if they ever needed him, he'd be ready, because that's what heroes do. The story of Buddy's heroism spread far beyond their small Kansas town, becoming a beacon of hope for families everywhere. News outlets picked up the tale of the German Shepherd, who had saved his family not once, but twice, and how his bravery had inspired a program that was changing lives. Emma's phone rang non-stop for weeks. People from across the country wanted to know more about Buddy's shield and how they could help. One evening, as Emma sat reading emails from families who had benefited from the program, she paused on one message that stood out. It was from a retired veteran named Thomas, who had adopted a stray German Shepherd through the program. The email was simple but powerful. "I didn't know I needed him as much as he needed me. Because of your program, I sleep through the night for the first time in years. Thank you for giving me a reason to feel safe again." Emma's eyes filled with tears. Buddy, curled up at her feet, lifted his head as if sensing her emotions. She reached down to stroke his ears, her heart swelling with pride. Buddy hadn't just saved their family. He had created a ripple effect of safety, healing, and hope that extended far beyond their home. Years later, Buddy's Shield had grown into a national nonprofit organization, helping to place thousands of rescue dogs with families in need. Buddy, now graying around the muzzle but still full of life, was a living legend in their community. Lucas and Abby, now teenagers, often helped with the program, teaching younger kids about the importance of trust and loyalty between a dog and its family. One warm summer evening, Emma found herself sitting on the porch again, watching the sunset. Buddy lay at her feet, his once boundless energy now mellowed, but his protective instincts as sharp as ever. Abby joined her, resting her head on Emma's shoulder. "Do you think Buddy knows how much he means to us?" Abby asked softly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. Emma smiled, her eyes glistening. "I think he does, but it doesn't hurt to remind him." She leaned down and kissed the top of Buddy's head. "Thank you, Buddy, for everything." The old German Shepherd wagged his tail slowly, his eyes warm and wise. He didn't need words to understand what Emma meant. He had always known his purpose: to protect, to love, to make his family feel safe. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the yard in a golden glow, Buddy let out a soft sigh, content in the knowledge that he had done exactly that. Because sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they're covered in fur, with eyes full of loyalty and hearts bigger than the world.